Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. Today we are going to finish up with double falsehood by hearing from Duke Angelo in Act 5, Scene 2. But oh my goodness, yesterday we were in Act 4, Scene 2, so we do have some catch up that we need to do. And Act 5, Scene 1 and Act 5, Scene 2 are both relatively long, and there's only one monologue between the two of them, so this is going to be a long video and there's not much I can do about that, so I apologize. But anyway, the things to remember as we head into Act 5 are that Roderick and Enriquez had taken a hearse into a nunnery where Leonora was staying, so hopefully they could get at her and get her out. And Violante and Julio are both still really depressed about their states in life, and they were commiserating with each other about how sad their lives had become. So, Act 5, Scene 1, we have Roderick and Enriquez and a veiled Leonora coming out of the nunnery, and Enriquez is like, now we can be together, and he professes his love for Leonora, and she's looking at Roderick like, how are you helping him? Like, what are you doing? Like, how does he deserve a brother like you? And what are you doing being all shady? And she turns to Enriquez, and she's like, I still don't like you. And Roderick is like, oh, I maybe should have found out more about this whole thing before agreeing to help my brother kidnap a woman who, as it turns out, doesn't even like him. So they say that they're going to take her to like some sort of lodge so that she can rest and relax and feel better about things. And they start to go off. Enriquez and Leonora actually make it off the stage, but as Roderick is leaving, Violante, who is still dressed as a shepherd boy, comes in and tugs on Roderick's sleeve, and she's like, I need to talk to you for a minute. And she ends up admitting that she is a woman who was wronged by Enriquez, and she lets him know that Julio is nearby, and Roderick suggests that maybe she speak to Duke Angelo, Roderick's father, in order to get a little bit of help, and that's the end of Act 5, Scene 1. Act 5, Scene 2 starts off with Camillo and Don Bernard and Duke Angelo, and they're talking about how much they miss their kids and how much they want them back again. And Don Bernard is like desperate to get Leonora back, so much so that he doesn't care what state she's in or what has happened to her. He just wants her back. And then this messenger comes in and lets them know that Roderick is coming, and they're like, oh, he's on his way back. Is he by himself? And the messenger's like, no, there's a hearse and some mourners following along with him. And that sets Camillo off. Camillo's like, it's my Julio. It's my Julio that's dead. So he starts to spiral thinking that his kid is dead. But then Roderick comes in and he's like, I have something to show you. And Leonora comes in wearing a veil, and Enriquez comes in, and Enriquez is like, oh, our dads are here. Hey, Dad. And of course, all of the dads are so happy. They embrace their kids and they're like, oh, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad to see you. But Camillo still sits there and he's a little bit curmudgeonly because he hasn't gotten his kid back, and he's a little bit jealous about all of this stuff. And Duke Angelo is like, Leonora, I need to say something to you. And she's like, okay, I'll listen. And Duke Angelo says, the voice of parents is the voice of gods, for to their children they are heaven's lieutenants, made fathers, not for common uses merely of procreation. Beasts and birds would be as noble then as we are, but to steer the wanton freight of youth through storms and dangers, which with full sails they bear upon, and straighten the moral line of life they bend so often. For these are we made fathers, and for these may challenge duty on our children's part. Obedience is the sacrifice of angels, whose form you carry. So he's musing on the father-child relationship a little bit and saying sort of how great dads are, and that they like to take care of their kids, and they're given these responsibilities, and they're supposed to take care of their kids and keep their kids on the straight and narrow path, but kids are also supposed to be listening to what their parents say and what their fathers are all about. Kids are supposed to be obedient. So Leonora says, all right, I'll do what you want. I'll marry Enriquez, but first I would like an opportunity to mourn Julio properly, because I haven't gotten to do that. And Camillo's like, oh, that's actually kind of nice. Yeah, that makes sense. And meanwhile, through a lot of this, Violante, who is still in disguise as the shepherd boy, has been like kind of coming out like she's going to say something, but then she goes back and hides again, and kind of goes back in and kind of like hides again, until finally they're like, isn't that shepherd boy that we knew? And they have her come out, and she says that she is a former page of Enriquez who was treated very badly. And Enriquez is like, I never had a page. I don't even know who that is. Like, what? And Camillo's like, yeah, Enriquez is totally the sort of guy who would be bad to his page. I totally buy that. And Violante is like, I have a witness who can swear to my poor treatment, and goes off to find said witness, at which point Roderick is like, actually, I'm the witness, and here I have this letter that shows his Enriquez's poor treatment of that shepherd boy, and starts reading this letter. This is the letter that Enriquez had sent to Violante to break up with her after he raped her. And Enriquez is like, oh, I wrote that letter. I did write that letter, but how did that shepherd boy get it? That shepherd boy must have stolen it from somebody. Like, how else could he possibly have gotten it? At which point Violante comes back in dressed as herself, along with Julio, who is now in disguise. And Enriquez recognizes that this is Violante, and she's like, yeah, you wronged me, and that was bad, but, can you please just sort of restore my honor? I'm not going to do anything to you. If you can please just restore my honor so I can have my reputation back. And the little speech that she gives there, which is not long enough to be a monologue for this project, it moves Enriquez enough that he falls in love with her all over again and says that he wants to marry her. And Camillo's like, well, that's an interesting change of pace. So Enriquez then also asks Leonora for forgiveness for breaking up her and Julio, and he says that he's going to spend the rest of his life trying to make it up to Julio. And Roderick is like, hang on a second, Leonora. What do you think of this guy here? This one that came in with this guy that came in along with Violante, at which point Julio takes off his disguise, and Julio and Leonora are like, oh, I love you, and they fall into each other's arms, and they get so lovey with each other that Camillo doesn't recognize that this is his son, and he's like, wait, who is that guy? Who is that guy? And they're like, that's your son. He's still alive. And finally Camillo comes around to realize that this is Julio, that Julio's not dead, so he's happy about that, and everybody forgives everybody for all of their stuff, and Duke Angelo says, all right, everybody, let's go back to court so that we can get married. We're going to have Enriquez marry Violante, we're going to have Julio marry Leonora, and everything ends up theoretically the way that it should, because comedies are supposed to end in marriage, and these are the pairings that we should have had as of the beginning of the play, but everything got all wayward in the middle and blah blah blah, and that's why it's considered a comedy. So that's Double Falsehood, and it's I don't find it as satisfying a play as some of the others. I can see elements of some of Shakespeare's other plays in there, and there definitely is a different flavor in the first 3 acts than in the last 2, which is probably why they say Shakespeare likely wrote the first 3 acts and somebody else likely wrote the last 2. But there are elements, bringing in the veiled, wronged woman so she can reveal herself at the end is very measure for measure. The whole lovers thing, if you wanted to equate Enriquez and Violante and Julio and Leonora to the lovers from Midsummer Night's Dream, and that one of them goes wayward but ends up back where he was supposed to be after taking this other sort of fantasy journey. There is sort of that element in there, but it also deals with some sort of rough stuff, the loss of a child, and not necessarily the death of a child, but the separation from a child, and there's a threatened suicide in it, and there's one actual rape and then another potential rape that happened to the same character. So maybe a little bit of a dark comedy if it is indeed a comedy. But yeah, I would love to know what you thought of this play and what you thought of it in regards to some of the other stuff that we have studied over the last almost 5 years, which is, I bring that bit up to let you know that Double Falsehood was the last of the apocryphal plays that we had to go through. We've done Shakespeare's entire canon, and we've done all of the apocrypha at this point. So next we got to move into the poems. We're going to start in with the sonnets, starting with sonnet number 1 tomorrow. So I will see you then for that. Mwah.